Yesterday, reports surfaced that another aide to Vice President Kamala Harris has called it quits. Vincent Evans, the Deputy Director of Public Engagement and Intergovernmental Affairs, will leave to work at the Congressional Black Caucus as reports of tension and dysfunction inside Harris's office circulate on Capitol Hill. But according to CNBC, a person familiar with Evans' departure says he is leaving on great terms with the vice president.
And while hundreds of people were stuck freezing in their cars on a Virginia highway, the vice president took to Twitter to proclaim that the United States is, quote, moving again thanks to Biden's infrastructure spending. Harris was met with criticism over the post on social media from users who replied with stories and photos of people stuck on I-95. Around 5 p.m., the Virginia Department of Transportation, Fredericksburg, said that no one was still stranded on I-95. Team Rising is here to discuss. Democratic strategist Michael Starr Hopkins and Stephen Kent, author of How the Force Can Fix the World, join us now to discuss. Gentlemen, welcome.
Nice to be here.
Thanks for having us.
So, Michael, I'll start with you. Is this, this is fair, right? She should have, I don't know, maybe she scheduled this tweet in advance. It's not even her, it's somebody on her staff. But we got to make fun of her for this.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of one of those things that, like, the media is going to poke at. But we all know the vice president has nothing to do with the highways. This was a failure by the state of Virginia. And their
There's nothing to do,
patrol.
Period.
Well, I mean, she's the vice president. She's the second most powerful person in the world. But the tweet itself, it's kind of one of those things you poke at, but it's confirmation bias. If you like her, you like her. If you don't like her, you don't like her, and you find a reason why this is a failure for her. It's, kind of the D.C. landscape.
Right. And Stephen, wouldn't it have been more fun if she'd have found an opportunity to poke fun at Buttigieg over I-95 instead of saying that things are moving again? Things will be moving again once Pete gets back to, gets to work and gets things moving.
Yeah, passing the buck is kind of what they do in Washington. But I got to say, like, the news coverage of that tweet is sort of an example of partisanship causes brain damage. I mean, just the idea that the president of the United States and the vice president of the United States should be pausing all of their social media activity and all of their press releases because there's a traffic jam, even a really bad one in Virginia, is kind of nonsense to me. Like, national infrastructure is an important issue, and they should be promoting whatever they're working on. This is kind of a modern phenomenon, and by that I mean sort of the last 100 years, that the president and the vice president should be focused on national disasters of any kind. So I really do think that we need to sort of reject this modern principle of the vice president being involved in these kind of matters as being important.
And Michael, it's kind of a representative of D.C. myopia, right? To Stephen's point, it's really, really bad traffic jam. Practically almost 24 hours. Some people were stuck in that. Mm-hmm. But it was still a traffic jam. Nobody died. Nobody got hurt, apparently, even. But it was right outside of Washington, D.C. And so we're all fixated on it as a result.
Yeah, I mean, it's purely a product of kind of the Beltway mentality. Something bad happens in D.C. or in the surrounding area, and now all of a sudden it's a national story. I think a lot of people don't like Kamala Harris, and so it's easy to make fun of the tweet and then, try to hold her accountable for something she has nothing to do.
Right. And I think to the point of, departures within Harris's office, which I think we'll be getting to as later, it's been a dysfunctional vice presidential office for the past year. They've had a lot of problems managing their affairs with the president of the United States in the Oval Office. But this is kind of cheap shots that you might see playing out in HBO's Veep. And I really do think that Americans would be better off not thinking of the vice president as having anything to do with this. It was sort of created actually by Calvin Coolidge back in 1927. There was historic flooding in Mississippi, and the governor called to the White House or sent a letter to the White House for help on this issue because he wanted federal dollars to deal with the disaster. Calvin Coolidge said, "This is not my job," so he sent Herbert Hoover to deal with it. Ever since then, vice presidents have sort of been tasked with this job of dealing with funerals and disasters. And this one, I think, is quite, like you said, myopic in terms of disasters.
I'm glad you referenced Calvin Coolidge, who was our last truly great president. I'm sure you
truly
would agree, right? Well, the last one to reflect my ideology.
And let's add Herbert Hoover as a technocrat and a logistical logistical, what would you call it? I don't know, logistician?
Military governor of the Philippines or whatever, right?
He was absolutely brilliant technocrat.
Right.
And he handled that flood extraordinarily well. It helped him become president. But it turned out that you need more than a technocrat in the White House.
He got kind of unlucky.
Facing the Great Depression.
He got kind of unlucky, right?
Well, I mean, yes, obviously he got unlucky in the fact that the economy imploded on his watch, but it imploded in 1929, within weeks of his, within months of his coming to power. And he had, all he could do is kind of these technocratic little fixes rather than what needed to be done, which is an entire reorientation of the economy. So that's the difference between
it's the false promises, the technocracy, and progressive government. I mean, these people cannot manage an economy, much less the Department of Transportation manage a traffic jam. This is the job of governors, and this is the job of counties. And look, the traffic jam has been cleared. It was really bad, but it's time to move on. But people are even focusing on incoming Governor Glenn Youngkin, and trying to say that this was his fault. It's complete mental illness, and we need to get on with our lives.
Well, Michael.
Also, he was Secretary of Commerce, not Vice President.
Yeah.
Just for the fact checkers out there that are going to go after us for that.
Right. Well, we were relying on Wikipedia.
I know.
Again.
I was like, I'm pretty sure he was Secretary of Commerce. Let me. No, I did not use Wikipedia.
The viewers hate when we cite Wikipedia. Michael, so just going back to Kamala Harris, the only reason I think it matters is because she is the by far most likely successor to Joe Biden, who I think will run again in 2024, but in 2028, it will be, there's not that much competition. There are not that many high-profile names or exciting people on the Democratic side. It's kind of weird. It just is the way it is. So the fact that she is the obvious successor, by far the likely to be the next person president after Joe Biden is president, at least on the Democratic side. And she's not she's less popular than he is. I guess we saw one poll the other week where she was more popular, but generally she's less popular than he is. And that's a huge problem. And the Democratic Party is not doing anything to grapple with that problem, to help fix it, even though it seems like a very important deal.
Yeah, it's interesting. You don't see her having a lot of allies outside of the White House, and actually not a lot of allies inside the White House. And so I think, should Biden not run, it'll be really interesting to see what the field looks like, because I think it's not just her and Buttigieg, but I think you could see the former governor from Louisiana run. I think there's going to be a full field of people who are interested in this. And for all of her positives, she's not a good campaigner. And so without a good portfolio to be able to fall back on, it's going to be really tough for her. And so I think that's why she's had such a tough time. I know people in her office, and a lot of the frustrations have been a lack of a portfolio, a lack of being able to actually make substantive change, so that should Biden not run, she has something to fall back on.
And I do want to add, and then we have to wrap it. The move that Vincent Evans made from the vice president's office over to be executive director of the CBC, it's a pretty good move. I think it's quite credible to say that he didn't leave on unhappy terms. Like that, executive director of the CBC is a good job in Washington. Like that,
that's a lateral move.
It's at least lateral, and it's getting onto a rising ship rather than a sinking ship.
Gets him out of there.
Yeah, right.
All right, we got to wrap. Michael, Stephen, thank you so much for joining us.
Sure.
As always.
Thanks.
Stay with us. We'll be back with more Rising in just a minute.